Document. Part 1 of the peace treaty was a lie. Humanity knew the truth all along. John Carter sat in his small office at the United Earth Embassy on Mars. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air filtration system and the occasional beep from his computer terminal. Outside the large window, the red Martian landscape stretched endlessly, its barren hills and valleys bathed in the dim light of the distant sun. It had been 5 years since the signing of the peace treaty with the Valith, and John still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in front of him. Papers and reports cluttered his desk, but none of them held any answers to the questions nagging at the back of his mind. The treaty had promised an end to decades of war between humanity and the alien species known as the Valith. Everyone celebrated it as a historic moment, a chance for both sides to heal and rebuild. But deep down, John knew better. He had fought in the war. He had seen the destruction firsthand, and he didn't trust the sudden change in the Valith's behavior. John sighed and rubbed his temples. His thoughts drifted to Rachel Bennett, the scientist who worked in the embassy's research lab. She was one of the few people he could talk to without feeling like he was being judged. Rachel had always been skeptical too. They often shared their doubts over coffee during late-night shifts when most of the staff had gone home. Both of them felt like outsiders among the diplomats and bureaucrats who seemed eager to move on from the past. Tonight, however, John wasn't thinking about coffee or casual conversations. He was trying to make sense of a strange discovery he'd made earlier that evening. While reviewing old files related to diplomatic communications, he stumbled upon something unusual, a folder labeled Restricted Access. Curiosity got the better of him, so he entered his credentials to open it. To his surprise, the system granted him access. Inside were documents dated just before the treaty was signed. They contained fragments of intercepted messages between high-ranking officials and military leaders. At first glance, the content seemed harmless enough. Routine updates and logistical plans. But as John read further, certain phrases caught his attention. Words like strategic withdrawal, temporary ceasefire, and long-term objectives appeared repeatedly. None of it sounded like the language of genuine peace. Instead, it hinted at something more calculated, more deliberate. What worried him even more was the tone of urgency in some of the memos, as if those involved were rushing to implement a plan they didn't fully understand, or didn't want others to. Before John could finish reading, the screen went black. A message flashed across the display. Access denied. Authorization revoked. Startled, he tried logging back in, but the system refused to recognize his credentials. Someone, or something, had locked him out. For a moment, he sat frozen, his heart pounding. Had he triggered an alarm? Was someone watching him? Deciding not to take any chances, John closed the program and shut down his computer. He glanced around the room, half expecting security guards to burst through the door. When nothing happened, he exhaled slowly and grabbed his coat. He needed to tell Rachel what he'd found. If anyone could help him figure out what was going on, it was her. Rachel was in the lab when John arrived. She looked up from her microscope and smiled wearily. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Like John, she often worked late into the night, poring over samples and data collected from various Valith artifacts. Her job was to study their biology and technology, hoping to find ways to improve relations, or at least ensure humanity stayed one step ahead if things went south. "Hey John," she said, setting down her tools. "What brings you here this late?" "I think I found something," John replied, pulling up a chair beside her workstation. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how much detail to share. Finally, he decided to start with the basics. "I was looking through some old files tonight. Classified stuff. There were references to, well, things that don't add up." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like orders to reduce our military presence near Valith territories. Orders to stop monitoring their movements. Stuff that feels way too convenient for them. And inconvenient for us," Rachel added, frowning. "Did you manage to save anything?" "No. Whoever controls those files must have realized I was poking around because my access was cut off almost immediately. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. That doesn't sound good. Do you think someone's hiding something? I don't know, John admitted. But I can't shake the feeling that the treaty isn't what it seems. We've been told it's about peace, but what if it's actually part of some bigger scheme? Rachel leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. It wouldn't be the first time governments kept secrets from the public. Remember the early days of space exploration? Half the missions were classified, and no one knew why until years later. This is different, John insisted. If we're wrong about the Valith, if they're planning something, we need to know now, not after it's too late. Rachel agreed. Okay, let's assume you're onto something. Where do we start? We dig deeper, John said firmly. You have access to the archives, right? Maybe there's more information buried in older records, something that slipped through the cracks. Rachel hesitated. I'll see what I can do. But John, if whoever blocked your access finds out we're snooping around, we could be in serious trouble. I know, John said quietly, but I'd rather risk getting in trouble than sit back and wait for disaster to strike. Over the next few days, Rachel combed through the embassy's extensive database, searching for anything that might shed light on John's suspicions. Most of the files were mundane, filled with routine reports and bureaucratic jargon. But then she stumbled upon something unusual. A series of encrypted logs from reconnaissance drones deployed near Valith colonies shortly before the treaty was signed. The logs contained detailed scans of Valith infrastructure, including massive construction projects underway on several planets. According to the timestamps, these activities had occurred during the supposed negotiations for peace. Why would the Valith invest so heavily in building new facilities while claiming they wanted to end hostilities? Rachel copied the data onto a secure drive and brought it to John. Together, they analyzed the scans, piecing together clues that painted a troubling picture. The Valith weren't preparing for peace. They were preparing for war. Their actions suggested they were stockpiling resources, fortifying defenses, and positioning themselves for a future conflict. As they worked, John couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. If the Valith were planning another attack, humanity was woefully unprepared. The treaty had lulled everyone into a false sense of security. Military bases had been dismantled, fleets reduced, and funding redirected to civilian projects. Even worse, the public had embraced the idea of coexistence, dismissing warnings from veterans and analysts as paranoia. We have to warn someone, Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. This can't stay hidden. John shook his head. Who would believe us? The Council has spent years convincing everyone that the Valith are trustworthy. If we try to expose this, we'll be branded as traitors or worse. Rachel bit her lip, considering their options. Then maybe we should go outside the system, find someone who can help us spread the word. John nodded reluctantly. He knew she was right. If they wanted to uncover the truth, they couldn't rely on official channels. They needed allies, people willing to listen and act. But finding such individuals wouldn't be easy, especially given the risks involved. For now, all they could do was keep digging. Every piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the deception. And though the weight of their discovery pressed heavily on their shoulders, John and Rachel resolved to see it through. Whatever the cost, they owed it to humanity to reveal the lie behind the peace treaty. End of part 1. John and Rachel spent the next few days carefully planning their next move. They knew they couldn't confront the council or military leaders directly. Not yet. The encrypted logs Rachel had uncovered were compelling, but they weren't enough to convince anyone in power. Those at the top would dismiss their findings as speculation or worse, accuse them of fabricating evidence to stir up trouble. John and Rachel needed more proof, something undeniable that could expose the truth about the Valith and the so-called peace treaty. Their search for answers led them to Daniel Hayes, a retired general who had once commanded Earth's forces during the final years of the war. Daniel lived alone on Mars, far from the bustling cities and diplomatic centers. He was known for being reclusive, rarely speaking to anyone outside his small circle of friends. But John remembered hearing stories about him from other veterans. Daniel had always been skeptical of the sudden peace agreement, often warning his superiors that the Valith couldn't be trusted. If anyone had insights into what really happened, it was him. One evening, after securing clearance to leave the embassy grounds, John and Rachel boarded a transport shuttle bound for Daniel's remote outpost. The journey took several hours, giving them time to rehearse what they would say. They didn't want to alarm him or make it seem like they were accusing anyone without solid evidence. Still, they knew they had to tread carefully. If Daniel refused to help, their investigation might end before it even began. When they arrived, the landscape surrounding Daniel's home was bleak and desolate. A single-story structure stood against the backdrop of endless red sand, its walls weathered by years of exposure to the harsh Martian environment. As they approached the front door, John knocked firmly, hoping someone was inside. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, grizzled man with gray hair and piercing blue eyes. Daniel surveyed them silently, his expression unreadable. "You're not here to sell me something, are you?" he asked gruffly. "No, sir," John replied quickly. "We need your help." Daniel raised an eyebrow but stepped aside to let them in. The interior of the house was modest, filled with old furniture and shelves lined with books and memorabilia from his military career. He gestured for them to sit, before taking a seat himself. "All right then, what is it?" John glanced at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, he began explaining everything they had discovered, the restricted files, the drone scans, and their growing suspicions about the treaty. Daniel listened intently, his face remaining impassive throughout their story, and they finished. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I've heard rumors," he admitted finally. "Back when the negotiations started, there were whispers among the higher-ups. Some said the council wasn't negotiating, in good faith, that they were cutting deals behind closed doors to protect their own interests." "Do you think the council knew the Valith weren't sincere?" Rachel asked cautiously. Daniel nodded grimly. "It's possible. During my last months in command, I received intel suggesting the Valith were using the talks as a distraction. They were fortifying their borders and stockpiling weapons. We tried to warn the council, but no one listened. They wanted peace too badly, or at least they wanted people to believe they'd achieved it." Rachel frowned. "So the treaty was just a cover? A way to buy time?" "That's what it looks like," Daniel confirmed. "But there's more. Shortly before I retired, I overheard conversations between council members and corporate executives. They were discussing how reducing our military presence would free up resources for private ventures. It sounded like they saw the treaty as an opportunity to profit, while pretending to work toward peace." John felt a chill run down his spine. If Daniel was right, the betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. Not only had humanity been misled about the Valith's intentions, but influential figures within the council had actively facilitated the deception for their own gain. "What should we do now?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Daniel hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "You can't go public with this, not yet. Without hard evidence, you'll be branded as conspiracy theorists. The council will crush you before you even get started. But if you're determined to uncover the truth, there's someone who might be able to help." "Who?" John asked eagerly. "A journalist named Emily Dawson. She's based on Earth, but she's made a name for herself exposing corruption in corporations tied to the council. If anyone can dig up dirt on this, it's her." John exchanged a glance with Rachel. It was a risky plan, but it was also their best shot. "How do we contact her?" he asked. Daniel scribbled a name and address on a piece of paper and handed it to John. "Be careful," he warned. "If the council finds out you're poking around, they won't hesitate to silence you." Back at the embassy, John and Rachel debated whether to reach out to Emily immediately. Time was running out. If the Valith were planning another attack, every second counted. But contacting a journalist meant involving an outsider, someone who might not fully understand the gravity of the situation. In the end, they decided it was worth the risk. They drafted a message explaining their findings and sent it to Emily via a secure channel, hoping she would respond. Days passed without a reply, and John began to worry that their plea had fallen on deaf ears. Then, late one night, his communicator buzzed. It was a video call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitant but curious, he accepted the call. A woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes appeared on the screen. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and she wore a no-nonsense expression. "You must be John Carter," she said briskly. "I got your message." "Yes, ma'am," John replied, straightening in his chair. "Thank you for responding." "I'm Emily Dawson," the woman continued. "Your email raised some interesting points, but I need more than vague accusations if I'm going to look into this. Do you have any concrete evidence?" John glanced at Rachel, who nodded reassuringly. "We do," he said. "But it's sensitive information. We can't send it electronically. It's too risky." Emily studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Fine. Meet me on Earth tomorrow. There's a cafe in New Chicago where we can talk privately. Be discreet. Don't tell anyone where you're going." The line went dead before John could respond. He turned to Rachel, who looked equally stunned. "She sounds intense," Rachel remarked. "She's exactly what we need," John replied with a faint smile. The trip to Earth was nerve-wracking. John and Rachel traveled under false identities, avoiding official channels to minimize the risk of detection. When they finally reached New Chicago, they found the cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was a cozy place, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of conversation. Emily was already there, seated at a table near the back. She waved them over and gestured for them to sit. "Start talking," she said without preamble. For the next hour, John and Rachel recounted everything they knew: the encrypted logs, Daniel's testimony, and their suspicions about the council's involvement. Emily listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a tablet. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "This is big," she said finally. "If you're right, it's not just a scandal. It's treason. The council knowingly endangered humanity for profit. We need your help to expose it," Rachel urged. "But we can't do it alone." Emily nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But fair warning, this isn't going to be easy. The council has eyes everywhere, and if they catch wind of what we're doing, they'll come after us." "We understand," John said firmly. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't act now, the Valith will destroy us." Emily studied them for a moment longer, then extended her hand. "Welcome to the fight." As they shook hands, John felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since discovering the truth, he believed they might actually stand a chance. But he also knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, and that the hardest battles were still to come. Emily Dawson wasted no time getting to work. After their meeting at the cafe, she sent John and Rachel back to Mars with strict instructions to stay low and avoid drawing attention. Meanwhile, she began her own investigation, using her connections in the media and corporate world to dig deeper into the council's activities. Emily had spent years uncovering corruption, but this case was different. It wasn't just about exposing greed or incompetence. This was about survival. If the Valith were planning another attack, humanity needed to know before it was too late. Back on Mars, John and Rachel continued their search for evidence. They knew they couldn't rely solely on Emily to handle everything. The more information they could gather, the stronger their case would be. Rachel focused on analyzing the drone scans she had retrieved earlier, looking for patterns or anomalies that might reveal the Valith's true intentions. John, meanwhile, scoured the embassy's archives for any mention of suspicious activity involving the council or military leaders. Their efforts paid off when Rachel discovered something alarming. Hidden within the drone scans were blueprints for massive structures scattered across several planets near Valith territory. At first glance, the designs appeared to be industrial facilities, factories or refineries. But upon closer inspection, Rachel realized they weren't meant for production. The layouts resembled weapons depots and command centers. It seemed the Valith were building an army, preparing for a large-scale invasion. Rachel shared her findings with John, who immediately contacted Emily. "We need to move faster," he told her over a secure line. "The Valith aren't wasting any time. We think they're planning to strike soon." Emily agreed. "I've been digging into the Council's financial records," she said. "There are transfers I can't explain. Huge sums of money funneled into private companies linked to defense contractors. It looks like someone's profiting from all this. Do you think you can trace it back to specific individuals?" John asked. "I'm working on it," Emily replied, "but it's tricky. Whoever's behind this is good at covering their tracks." While Emily worked on the financial angle, John and Rachel decided to reach out to another potential ally, a whistleblower named Christopher Lane. Christopher had once worked in the Council's Defense Department, but left under mysterious circumstances. Rumors suggested he had uncovered evidence of misconduct and was forced out to keep him quiet. If anyone knew the inner workings of the Council's treachery, it was him. Tracking down Christopher proved difficult. He had gone off the grid after leaving his job, disappearing from public life entirely. But with Daniel Hayes's help, they managed to locate him living in a remote settlement on one of Mars's smaller colonies. When they arrived, they found a man who looked older than his years, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. Christopher listened silently as John and Rachel explained why they had come. When they mentioned the restricted files and drone scans, his expression darkened. "You're playing with fire," he warned. "If the Council finds out you're asking questions, they'll come after you." "We already know that," Rachel said firmly. "But we can't sit back and do nothing. Not when so many lives are at stake." Christopher hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll tell you what I know, but you need to promise me one thing. You'll use this information carefully. Once it gets out, there's no going back." He led them to a small storage unit where he kept documents and data chips collected during his time with the Council. Among the files were detailed plans showing how Earth's military forces had been systematically dismantled following the treaty. Troop numbers had been slashed, fleets reduced, and advanced weaponry decommissioned, all under the guise of promoting peace. What shocked John and Rachel most, however, were memos outlining contingency plans for dealing with civilian unrest, should the truth ever come to light. "This isn't just negligence," Christopher said grimly. "It's sabotage. The Council didn't just let the Valith deceive us, they helped them do it." Armed with this new evidence, John and Rachel returned to their base of operations, determined to compile everything they had into a single, undeniable report. They reached out to Emily, who was making progress on her end as well. She had uncovered emails between Council members and corporate executives discussing how reducing Earth's defenses would open up lucrative opportunities for private ventures. These conversations painted a clear picture. The treaty was never about peace. It was about profit. As they pieced together the puzzle, John couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Every day they delayed meant another day the Valith had to prepare for war. He suggested reaching out to Sarah Miller, a young engineer working on advanced communication systems back on Earth. If they could broadcast their findings to the public, they might be able to rally support before it was too late. Sarah was hesitant at first. She had always steered clear of politics, focusing instead on her work developing cutting-edge technology. But when John explained the stakes, she agreed to help. "If what you're saying is true, people deserve to know," she said. "I'll do whatever I can to make sure your message gets out." With Sarah on board, the group finalized their plan. They would smuggle the evidence off Mars and deliver it to her facility on Earth, where she would prepare a global transmission network, capable of reaching billions of viewers simultaneously. It was a risky move. The Council monitored all outgoing communications, and any unusual activity would raise red flags. But it was also their best chance to expose the truth. The night before their departure, John and Rachel met with Emily one last time. She had brought along a list of journalists and activists willing to amplify their message once the broadcast went live. "We're not alone in this," she assured them. "There are still good people out there who want to fight for justice." Despite her confidence, John couldn't ignore the weight of what they were about to attempt. If they succeeded, they would spark a revolution, one that could either save humanity or tear it apart. And if they failed, he didn't want to think about that. The journey to Earth was fraught with tension. John and Rachel disguised themselves as cargo handlers, hiding the data chips containing their evidence inside crates marked as spare parts. They boarded a transport ship bound for Earth's orbital station, avoiding checkpoints and security patrols as much as possible. For hours they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finally landed, they made their way to Sarah's lab without incident. She greeted them warmly, ushering them inside and locking the door behind them. "Let's get to work," she said, leading them to a secure server room. For the next 2 days, the team worked tirelessly, transferring the data onto Sarah's system and testing the transmission network. They encrypted the files to prevent tampering and added fail-safes to ensure the broadcast couldn't be intercepted. By the time they finished, exhaustion had set in, but there was no time to rest. The moment of truth was fast approaching. As they prepared to launch the broadcast, John received a call from Emily. Her voice was tense. "They know something's up," she said. "Agents loyal to the council are moving in. You need to hurry." John relayed the warning to the others. Sarah typed furiously, initiating the upload process while Rachel monitored the network for signs of interference. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming. "Hurry!" John urged, his heart pounding. Finally, the upload completed. Sarah hit the transmit button just as the door burst open. Armed guards stormed in, shouting, "Orders." John, Rachel, and Sarah raised their hands in surrender, knowing they had done all they could. The truth was out now. It was up to the world to decide what to do with it. The broadcast hit the airwaves like a shockwave, rippling across every corner of human civilization. Billions of screens flickered to life, televisions, tablets, phones, and public displays, all showing the same message. The video opened with a simple statement in bold letters: the peace treaty was a lie. For a moment there was silence. Then images began to appear, encrypted logs, drone scans, intercepted communications, and damning memos outlining the council's betrayal. Voiceovers explained each piece of evidence in clear, straightforward language, leaving no room for doubt. People watched in stunned disbelief. Families gathered around their screens. Neighbors stood frozen in streets lined with holographic billboards, and workers paused mid-task as the truth unfolded before their eyes. The revelations painted a grim picture. The Valith had never intended peace, and humanity's leaders had knowingly left them vulnerable to an impending invasion. As the broadcast concluded, a final message flashed on the screen. "The choice is yours. Will you stand by while they destroy us?" Chaos erupted almost instantly. Protests broke out in major cities across Earth and its colonies. Crowds chanted slogans demanding justice, holding signs that read, "Expose the traitors and no more lies." News outlets scrambled to cover the fallout, but their anchors struggled to keep up with the rapidly evolving situation. Social media platforms were flooded with posts sharing anger, fear, and calls to action. Some praised John, Rachel, and Emily for their bravery. Others accused them of fabricating lies to incite rebellion. Either way, the world was talking, and that was exactly what the team had hoped for. Back at Sarah's lab, things were far less celebratory. John, Rachel, and Sarah sat handcuffed in a dimly lit interrogation room deep within the orbital station. Their captors, agents loyal to the council, had confiscated their equipment and isolated them from one another. Despite the dire circumstances, John couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. The broadcast had worked. People knew the truth now, and the council's grip on power was beginning to slip. Still, he couldn't shake the gnawing worry about what would happen next. Hours passed before anyone came to see them. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a council agent who walked in. It was Emily Dawson. She carried herself with her. Usual confidence, though her sharp green eyes betrayed hints of exhaustion. "You're lucky I got here when I did," she said, gesturing for the guards to leave. Once they were alone, she unlocked their restraints. "They've been trying to suppress the story, but it's too late. The information is everywhere." "What happens now?" Rachel asked, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had dug into her skin. "Now, we fight back," Emily replied firmly. "The council will try to discredit you, paint you as radicals or conspiracists. But the public isn't buying it, not this time. We need to capitalize on that momentum while we still can. John nodded. How do we do that? We organize, Emily said. I've already reached out to contacts in the resistance movement. They're ready to mobilize. If we can channel the outrage into action, we might be able to force the council to step down, or at least weaken their control enough to give us a fighting chance against the Valith. Before they could discuss further, alarms blared throughout the station. Lights flashed red and automated voices warned of an incoming threat. Emily frowned, pulling up a live feed on her communicator. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of Valith ships were descending upon Earth's atmosphere, their sleek, insect-like designs unmistakable even from a distance. It was happening. The invasion had begun. Panic spread like wildfire as news of the attack reached the population. Cities descended into chaos as people fled for shelter or armed themselves in desperation. Military forces scrambled to respond, but years of disbanding units and dismantling fleets left them woefully unprepared. The Valith struck with precision, targeting key infrastructure, power grids, communication hubs, and transportation networks. Within hours, entire regions were plunged into darkness. Amid the turmoil, John, Rachel, Emily, and Sarah regrouped in a secure bunker beneath the orbital station. They weren't safe there, but it gave them a temporary reprieve from the chaos above. Around a makeshift table, they strategized their next move. We need to rally whoever's left, John said. If we can unite the survivors, we might stand a chance. But how? Rachel asked. Most of our forces are gone. Even if we manage to pull something together, it won't be enough to stop them. There are still pockets of resistance, Emily reminded them. Soldiers who refuse to stand down, civilians who stockpiled weapons, they're out there. We just have to find them. Sarah spoke up hesitantly. What about the technology I've been working on? My team developed experimental weapons designed to counteract Valith shielding. If we can get those prototypes operational, it could level the playing field. John turned to her, his expression hopeful. Can you make it work? It'll take time, Sarah admitted. But if we can hold out long enough, then let's focus on survival for now, John decided. We'll split up. Emily, you stay here and coordinate with the resistance. Rachel and Sarah, come with me. We'll head to Earth and retrieve those prototypes. Emily nodded. Be careful. The Valith aren't going to let you get close. We don't have a choice, John replied grimly. If we fail, humanity fails with us. Reaching Earth proved more challenging than expected. The Valith had established blockades around major cities, cutting off escape routes and trapping millions inside. John, Rachel, and Sarah boarded a small transport shuttle disguised as a supply vessel, relying on its outdated systems to avoid detection. As they approached the planet's surface, they witnessed the devastation firsthand. Craters scarred the landscape, smoke choked the skies, and fires raged unchecked in the distance. The sight filled them with dread, but also determination. Their destination was a research facility located in the ruins of an old industrial complex. Sarah had overseen the development of the experimental weapons there, and if they were lucky, some of her team might still be alive. The journey was perilous, forcing them to navigate through debris-filled streets and evade patrols of Valith drones. At one point, they narrowly escaped capture after being spotted by a scout unit. Only quick thinking and sheer luck saved them from being overwhelmed. When they finally reached the facility, they found it abandoned and partially destroyed. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of burnt metal and ash. Rachel searched the main lab while John secured the perimeter. In a hidden compartment beneath a workstation, Sarah discovered several crates containing the prototype weapons. These should work, she said, inspecting one of the devices. They emit pulses that disrupt Valith energy fields. If we can mass-produce them, we might be able to turn the tide. As they prepared to leave, a low hum echoed through the building. John froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. We're not alone, he whispered. Moments later, a group of Valith soldiers burst into the room, their elongated limbs and metallic exoskeletons glinting menacingly in the dim light. John shouted for everyone to move, and they sprinted toward the exit, firing wildly to cover their retreat. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the aliens' armor, but the distraction bought them precious seconds. They piled into their transport shuttle just as the Valith closed in, taking off mere moments before the facility collapsed under a barrage of enemy fire. Back at the orbital station, Emily had managed to establish contact with several resistance cells scattered across Earth and Mars. Using encrypted channels, she coordinated efforts to strike back against the Valith invaders. Reports poured in of small victories, ambushes on supply lines, sabotage of enemy equipment, and daring rescues of trapped civilians. Each success boosted morale, proving that humanity hadn't given up yet. When John, Rachel, and Sarah returned, with the prototype weapons, Emily wasted no time distributing them among the fighters. Training sessions were held in secret locations, teaching volunteers how to use the new technology effectively. Meanwhile, John devised a plan to launch a counteroffensive, a coordinated assault on a Valith command ship orbiting Earth. It was a risky gamble, but if successful, it could cripple their operations and buy humanity time to regroup. As preparations continued, John reflected on everything they had endured. Betrayal, loss, and despair had tested them all, but they had refused to surrender. Now, as he stood alongside Rachel, Sarah, and Emily, preparing for what might be their final stand, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity's future depended on their courage, and he vowed not to let them down. The counteroffensive was set to begin at dawn. John, Rachel, Emily, and Sarah gathered in a makeshift command center located deep within the orbital station. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, marking key locations of Valith forces and their command ship. The plan was risky, almost suicidal, but it was the only chance humanity had to strike back meaningfully. Every available fighter, from trained soldiers to ordinary civilians, had been recruited for the mission. Armed with Sarah's prototype weapons, they would launch a coordinated attack on multiple fronts, drawing the Valith's attention away from their orbiting command ship. Once the enemy fleet was distracted, a small strike team led by John would infiltrate the command vessel and disable its core systems. As the hours ticked down, tension filled the room. Volunteers checked their gear, sharpened blades, and tested the experimental pulse rifles. Some prayed quietly, others exchanged nervous jokes to ease the weight of what lay ahead. Rachel moved among them, offering words of encouragement and making sure everyone understood how to use the new technology. "Remember," she said, holding up one of the pulse rifles, "these weapons are our best shot. Aim for their chest. Plates, the shielding is weakest there." Emily stood nearby, coordinating final details over her communicator. Her face was pale but resolute as she relayed updates to resistance cells across Earth and Mars. "We're counting on you all," she told them. "Stick to the plan, and don't hesitate to retreat if things go wrong. We can't afford to lose anyone unnecessarily." John paced the room, his mind racing through every possible scenario. He knew the odds were against them. The Valith outnumbered humanity's ragtag force by a wide margin, and their advanced technology still gave them an edge. But despite the grim outlook, John couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For the first time in years, humanity wasn't divided by politics or greed. People from all walks of life had come together, united by a common cause: survival. At sunrise, the operation commenced. Waves of fighters surged forward, engaging Valith patrols in urban ruins and barren wastelands. Explosions lit up the horizon as makeshift bombs tore through enemy supply lines. The pulse rifles proved devastatingly effective, sending bursts of energy that shattered Valith shields and left their armored bodies vulnerable. Resistance members cheered each other on, emboldened by early successes. Even so, casualties mounted quickly. The Valith fought back with brutal efficiency, their drones hunting down stragglers and reinforcements arriving faster than expected. Meanwhile, John's strike team boarded a captured transport shuttle modified to mimic Valith designs. Disguised as part of the alien fleet, they slipped past outer defenses and docked with the command ship. Inside, the air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of machinery. The corridors were dimly lit, lined with strange symbols etched into metallic walls. Every step felt heavier than the last as the team advanced cautiously, knowing they were walking into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. Rachel took point, scanning the area with a handheld device designed to detect energy signatures. "This way," she whispered, motioning toward a sealed door ahead. Using tools salvaged from Sarah's lab, she bypassed the lock and ushered the group inside. What they found stopped them in their tracks, a massive chamber filled with glowing conduits and pulsating cores. This was the nerve center of the entire Valith operation. "We need to destroy this," John said, his voice steady despite the enormity of the task. "If we take out the core, it'll cripple their communications and coordination." Sarah nodded, pulling out a series of charges rigged to overload the system. "I'll plant these around the main conduit. It should create a chain reaction once detonated." While Sarah worked, John and the others kept watch, fending off waves of Valith soldiers who had discovered their presence. The fight was chaotic and brutal, forcing the humans to rely on quick reflexes and teamwork to survive. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and sparks flew as pulse rifles clashed with alien weaponry. Despite being outnumbered, the strike team held their ground, determined to give Sarah enough time to finish her work. Finally, she signaled that the charges were set. "Let's move," John shouted, leading the retreat. They sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors, dodging patrols and collapsing sections of the ship as secondary explosions rocked the structure. Behind them, alarms blared, and the hum of the ship grew louder, more erratic. They reached the docking bay just as the command ship began to break apart. Their shuttle launched moments before the vessel imploded in a blinding flash of light. From a safe distance, they watched as debris rained down, scattering across the void like embers from a dying fire. Cheers erupted among the crew, but John remained silent, his gaze fixed on the destruction below. Victory had come at a terrible cost, and he knew the war was far from over. Back on Earth, news of the strike spread rapidly. Resistance fighters celebrated openly, their spirits buoyed by the success of the mission. For the first time since the invasion began, the tide seemed to be turning. Without their command ship, the Valith forces became disorganized, retreating from key positions to regroup. Civilians emerged from hiding, joining the fight or tending to the wounded. Hope flickered anew, fragile but undeniable. In the aftermath, Emily addressed the public via a patched-together broadcast network. Standing amidst the ruins of a city square, she spoke directly to the camera, her voice firm and unwavering. "Today, we showed them that humanity will not go quietly into the night. We've taken back some of what they stole from us, but the battle isn't over. We must remain vigilant, united, and ready to defend our future." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring countless others to join the resistance. Factories reopened. To produce more pulse rifles, engineers worked tirelessly to improve the prototypes, and volunteers trained day and night to prepare for the next phase of the conflict. Slowly but surely, humanity began to rebuild, not just its cities, but its resolve. Amidst the chaos, John sought answers about the Valith's motivations. During the assault on the command ship, they had captured a high-ranking officer named Kael'thar. Held in a secure cell aboard the orbital station, the alien refused to speak at first. His elongated limbs crossed defiantly as he stared at his captors with cold, unblinking eyes. But after hours of interrogation, John managed to break through. "You see yourselves as conquerors," Kael'thar sneered, his voice distorted by translation software. "But we are merely ensuring our survival. Your species advances too quickly, consumes too recklessly. Left unchecked, you would overrun us, dominate the stars. This war was inevitable." John clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. "So you decided to wipe us out instead? To lie to us, betray us, and slaughter billions?" Kael'thar tilted his head as if amused by the question. "You misunderstand. We do not seek annihilation. We seek control. A controlled humanity is less dangerous than a free one. Your leaders understood this. They made the choice long ago." The revelation hit John like a punch to the gut. The council hadn't just collaborated with the Valith, they had agreed to subjugation in exchange for power. Betrayal upon betrayal, layer upon layer of deceit. It was almost too much to bear. When he relayed Kael'thar's words to the others, Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "They sold us out completely," she murmured. "Not just to profit, but to save themselves." "And now they think they can hide behind their titles," Emily added bitterly. "Well, let them try. When this is over, we'll make sure they answer for what they've done." For the first time in days, John allowed himself a small smile. No matter how dark the road ahead might be, one thing was certain: humanity had awakened. United by shared suffering and fueled by righteous fury, they would fight, not just to survive, but to reclaim their freedom. The days that followed the destruction of the Valith command ship were a blur of activity. Resistance fighters worked tirelessly to capitalize on their newfound advantage, launching raids to reclaim territory and disrupt enemy supply lines. Factories churned out pulse rifles and other weapons based on Sarah's designs, while engineers modified captured Valith technology to create new tools for the fight. Civilians pitched in wherever they could, repairing damaged infrastructure, caring for the wounded, or gathering intelligence. The spirit of unity that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal burned brighter than ever. John, Rachel, Emily, and Sarah found themselves at the center of it all, coordinating efforts and strategizing for the battles ahead. They knew the Valith wouldn't stay disorganized forever. Sooner or later, they would regroup and strike back with even greater force. Humanity needed to be ready. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John stood on the balcony of the orbital station, staring out at the scarred surface of Earth. Fires still burned in distant cities, and plumes of smoke darkened the sky. But amid the devastation, he saw signs of resilience: lights flickering in rebuilt neighborhoods, makeshift shelters housing survivors, and fields being replanted despite the odds. It was a reminder that no matter how much was lost, humanity always found a way to rebuild. Rachel joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to John and leaned against the railing beside him. "Hard to believe we've come this far," she said softly. "Feels like just yesterday we were sneaking around the embassy, trying to figure out what was going on. And now look at us," John replied with a faint smile. "Leading an entire rebellion." "It's not over yet," Rachel reminded him. "We've won some battles, but the war is far from finished." John nodded. "I know, but for the first time I feel like we actually have a chance." Meanwhile, Emily continued her work exposing the Council's crimes. Using evidence gathered by John and Rachel, she published a series of reports detailing the corruption and collusion that had led to humanity's betrayal. The articles spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across the globe. Protesters stormed government buildings, demanding justice for those who had sacrificed so much only to be sold out by their own leaders. Arrests were made, trials began, and the once powerful council crumbled under the weight of its own deceit. But Emily didn't stop there. She called for sweeping reforms, urging the creation of a new governing body, one that prioritized transparency, accountability, and the protection of human life above all else. Her voice became a rallying cry for millions, inspiring hope in a future free from the shadows of greed and betrayal. Sarah, too, played a crucial role in humanity's resurgence. Her innovations in weapon design gave resistance fighters a fighting chance against the technologically superior Valith. Beyond the battlefield, she turned her attention to rebuilding efforts, developing sustainable energy solutions and medical technologies to aid survivors. Her work earned her widespread admiration, though she remained humble, insisting that she was simply doing her part. As weeks turned into months, the tide of the war began to shift decisively in humanity's favor. The loss of their command ship left the Valith scrambling to adapt, and their attempts to regain control were met with fierce resistance. Cities once occupied by alien forces were liberated, and pockets of human civilization began to thrive again. Morale soared as people realized they were winning, not just individual skirmishes, but the larger struggle for survival. Still, the cost of victory weighed heavily on everyone. Countless lives had been lost, families torn apart, and entire communities wiped off the map. John often thought about the faces of those who had fallen, the brave men and women who had given everything to ensure humanity's survival. He vowed never to forget them, no matter what happened next. One night, during a rare moment of quiet, the team gathered in the command center to discuss their final push. Intelligence reports indicated that the Valith were consolidating their remaining forces on a single planet near the edge of contested space. If humanity could launch a decisive assault and eliminate their last stronghold, the war might finally end. "We'll need every fighter we can get," John said, pointing to a holographic map projected in the center of the room. "This will be our biggest operation yet. No holding back." Emily nodded. "The public is behind us. People are volunteering in droves. We'll have more support than ever before. But the Valith won't go down without a fight," Rachel warned. "They'll throw everything they have at us." "That's why we hit them hard and fast," John replied. "We don't give them time to recover." Sarah spoke up, her voice steady. "I've been working on something that might help. An upgraded version of the pulse rifle. It's stronger, faster, and has a longer range. If we can equip our fighters with these, it could make all the difference." "Then let's get to work," John said firmly. "We don't have any time to waste." The final battle took place, on a barren moon orbiting the Valith stronghold. Thousands of ships descended upon the desolate landscape, unleashing a storm of fire and fury. Resistance fighters clashed with Valith soldiers in brutal hand-to-hand combat, while starships exchanged volleys of missiles and energy beams overhead. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground shook with the force of explosions. John led the charge, his upgraded pulse rifle cutting through enemy ranks with devastating efficiency. Around him, his comrades fought with equal determination, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat but filled with unyielding resolve. For hours, the outcome hung in the balance, each side refusing to yield. Finally, the tide turned. With Sarah's weapons giving them the edge they needed, humanity pushed the Valith back toward their fortress-like base. John and a small squad breached the structure, fighting their way to the central chamber where the Valith leader, a towering figure clad in shimmering armor, awaited them. "You think this changes anything?" the leader growled, raising a clawed hand to attack. "Even if you destroy us, your kind will destroy itself eventually." "Maybe," John admitted, leveling his rifle at the alien. "But not today." With a roar, the two sides clashed in a final desperate struggle. When the dust settled, the Valith leader lay defeated, and the fortress began to collapse. John and his team barely escaped as the building imploded behind them, signaling the end of the Valith threat. In the aftermath, the galaxy fell silent. Survivors emerged from bunkers and shelters, blinking in the light of a new dawn. Cheers erupted as word spread that the Valith were gone, for good this time. Celebrations broke out across Earth and its colonies, though tempered by the knowledge of all that had been lost. John, Rachel, Emily, and Sarah stood together on a hill overlooking a city slowly coming back to life. Construction crews worked. To repair damaged buildings, children played in the streets, and vendors set up stalls selling food and supplies. It was a scene of renewal, of hope rising from the ashes. "This isn't the end," Emily said quietly. "It's just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild, not just our homes, but trust in each other." John nodded. "And we'll do it together." That's what got us this far. As they watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years they believed in a better future. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger than ever. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them united, as one people determined to survive and thrive.